Peace and love. Peace and love, everyone. As I get established and share the screen. So gonna come in, settle down. This won't be long. Won't be an hour, not even 30 minutes. But we want to get to God's knowledge. All right. So y'all can see. Yeah. All right. Peace and love. As guidance for those who respect knowledge and wisdom. This is Sufayan Shah Reef speaking. And we're finna go over the Sufayan. And we're gonna see what does wisdom has to say of the self. What is the character called self in life? Because we must understand that if you did not have a self, if you did not have the self, as it say on number 2, if you did not have the self, then you would not have a life. So I want us to remember that. Forget everything else. That if you did not have a self, or excuse me, if you did not have the self, you would not have a life. Why? Because the 40th name, if you understand the context, 40 days and 40 nights, a lot of the prophets meditated and fasted. And it was for this connection of understanding. And this understanding will bring a knowing. And this knowing will evolve into a steady gnosis. And so we're going to get into the 40th name of the divine creator. We're going to learn about God's knowledge as the 40th name, the self. Number 4, the separation of the I from the family and the community. The self being the one, not the I, but the one. The one predates and pre-exists is the I. The one is also the self, and the self is also the being. So we understanding the separation of the I, the flesh from the family and the community, the perspective of the world from being aware of one's own existence. Now you have a perspective of the world, but it's from your own existence of awareness. What you have accumulated, not what others have told you or what the priests have told you to say, and these things and so forth, but one's own existence. Who created you and who created existence? This is what the understanding leads to. So you have a perspective of the world from being aware of your own existence. I need this, I need that, as it starts off. 6, the awareness of the I to its own. There you go. The awareness of the I to its own self. There we go. This is how we know the I is not the self. The I must come aware of the self. And this is called self-gnosis. And self-gnosis is a fancy word for wisdom. Self-knowing. Knowing oneself. If you know oneself, then you know one's existence. You have the awareness not for the world, but you have the awareness to become aware of your own self, to become aware of your own existence. And what would be better knowledge of God than one's own existence? 7, self, therefore, is nothing more than a unique perspective. A unique perspective. So the self can be seen, the self can be observed, the self has a perspective. If it can be seen, then it can see. And this creates a perspective. And we have to understand this perspective of self is unique. There's no other me. There's no other you. We are all together observing the all I. So we understand self is also unique. And therefore, if self is uniquely manifested, then self must have a unique perspective. Can see and be seen. So now we want to understand what is the purpose of us learning that we are a unique perspective. Because there's a part of the greater self, that the self of you is part of the greater self of the divine creator. As you observe, this is when you become part of the greater self or the higher self, as in circle 7. Sufayan, we say the greater self. The greater self observes the dream of creation. So the two cells that was linked have an indication right here. One can be seen and one is unseen. The one is unseen can observe. The one seen has a perspective. Look, shape, form, size, weight, height. So now that we understand the manifest, the greater self is the unmanifest. The unmanifest, you become manifest or unmanifest depending on the knowledge. Whatever knowledge is own self, then that knowledge is self. So self always wants to know the knowledge of self. 9, the most excelente, the most excellent jihad. So when you hear it in the Muslim world of the jihad, we're not talking about kamikazes. We're talking about the most excellent jihad is that for the conquest of self. Lowercase. The perspective. If we can conquer our own perspective by becoming aware of the self, by observing. And this is how you become a divine observant, a divine servant. Servant is for observant. So when you understand wisdom, wisdom is getting you to conquer this lower part, this manifested part, and giving you the ability to enjoy and access a greater part of self. 10, he who knows, not he who guesses, not also he who thinks and grow rich. thinks of, also not he who feels, but this is he who knows. So we're talking about a special knowing here related to the farther east as Janana. Janana. Jana or Janana is the burning away of manifestation. So the word knowledge comes from an ancient scripture that was in the time frame of BC as Jannah, kind of like you have for paradise. That Jannah was the paradise of the knowledge, and the knowledge what knowledge is. So knowledge is a fire. It's a spiritual wisdom, a spiritual fire. And when one understands and becomes this spiritual wisdom, then one be a Sufi, for short, Sufi. So he who knows his own, knows his own, knows his own. Not what they did, not what they wrote, not what that prophet wrote, not what this prophet wrote, not what this book say, not what this book don't say. We're talking about when he knows his own. When he knows his own self. Own self. Not the ownership of a car, not the ownership of TV, not the ownership of children, not the ownership of anything materialistic, not even the ownership of a concept. We're talking about when you know your own self, when you become the owner of self, then you will know the divine creator. He who knows his own self knows the divine creator. And that's God's knowledge. God's knowledge is self-knowledge. And to honor God, you must have self-knowledge. Without self-knowledge, you can't honor the deity God, the divine creator. You must know your own self to know that. Once again, we're coming from pre-21st century reasoning and ancient understanding. In ancient times, there was an ancient understanding in the ancient belief that if you are interested in texts that confirms, and those who study already know. Let's get to it. Before the prophets, you know what we got to say. We're talking about Before the prophets, we're talking about a humble servant who was keepers of the sacred al-Bakar of Abraham in the divine. So we're talking about an ancient, untold story that was kept and that was passed down by the descendants of Abraham, called the sacred, the pure al-Bakar. So we want to make sure, let's see. Just going to confirm this right quick. Number 16. The divine creator spoke to Abraham. So when he spoke to Abraham 17 with guidance from the divine creator. Abraham gave the people their first law. So now when we come to the al-Bakar, this is where you get the Indian text or the ancient Indian scriptures of the Vedas, the Vidyas. So when you come across the Vidyas of the ancient Vedic texts, or they call them Hinduism, wrongfully, those are texts and they class Buddhism under it. These are ancient theosophic writings of ancient wisdom in a time before our time, when it wasn't so much devastation of technology, when there was real wisdom and not technological smartphones and asking crystal phones and balls and TV devices. We're talking about a real inner knowing. So when we are speaking about al-Bakar, this is how knowledge was brought to the world. And that 20, Abraham is the father of all Arabia in the East. So when we're talking about the Father East teachings, those are Abraham teachings. Hence, you can call them, let's see, they have the word Brahmins. So if you hear this word in your spiritual study, Brahmins, they do got Brahmin bags, but we ain't talking about Brahmin bags. We just talk about these are people that use these names. And so the main thing with Brahmins is the Brahmin. And so Brahmin not correct in name, of course, that would be later 16th, 17th century Hinduism. Brahman connotes the highest universal principle, the ultimate reality of the universe. In major schools of Hindu philosophy, it is the immaterial, efficient, formal, and final cause of all that exists. It is the pervasive, infinite, eternal truth, consciousness, and bliss, which does not change. Yet it is the cause of all changes. Brahman, Brahman. You hear the man, or bruh, man, man, bruh. See, this is our ancient lingo in our DNA. And so for short, this was known as the Brahmayanas. Instead of the Hinduism, it was called Brahmayana for the sake of Abraham. So anything concerning the Indian text is dealing with people who was following Abraham's way. So Abraham's way from time immemorial to today has been passed down as Asalon, Sufayan, Asalon, the way Brahmayana, Sufayana, the way of all law, Sufayana, Brahmayana. This is the whole collection past, from ancient of past to all the way to present, with nothing missed, with all of everything included, from ancient Egypt to ancient Tantra to ancient everything dealing with morality, ethnos, logic, and the ultimate reality. Before there was theologies written on such theisms, we talking about the actual. And so this is why God's knowledge is understood. So what we the Atman from the Adam, we call, this is where it comes in as the son of Adam. The Atman, the Atman. So all this is included in the Brahmayana. The Atman would be as the Sufayan. The Atman is a Sanskrit word. Remember, we have our divine language, Sufayan. They have theirs, Sanskrit, which was ours. So we have to understand these is where the word man come from today. If you hear man and God are one. Though this was a Sanskrit word for the true or eternal self, or the self-existent essence of each individual, which persists across multiple bodies and lifetimes, which persists across multiple bodies and lifetime. So this is what we're talking about, the transcendental self, or the S with the cap, or the self with the capital S, known as pure wisdom or pure consciousness or self-knowledge, Brahmayana. Close to it right there, Brahmayana, Brahma Vidya, which Brahmayana, Sufayana. That's Vidya wisdom, coming from ancient scriptures before a Quran, a Bible, before a Kabbalah. We're talking about times before, where the Abrahamic way was lived and upheld. So this is where modern day we get the children version from the parent. So all that is still in line with today. So those are your farthest east teachings that bring in your Buddhist, your Lao Tzu, and other forms of what they would call Hinduism, what we call Brahmayana. So this is why when Allah spoke to Abraham, Allah spoke the Sufi, when Allah spoke the Sufayana. When he spoke the Sufayana, this is the guidance that was given to Brahmayana, Abraham. Allah spoke to Abraham. What did he speak? The guidance, the way. What was the way? The first law. What was the first law? The divine law. And so the law of all. And so now when we're talking about Allah Sufayana, Brahmayana, is the whole name of the complete trillion, if you want to go back to trillions of years, if you want to come all the way to present, that this is the way that it was before even prophets came on the scene, when Abraham was the great man and it was no other. And so just starting there, we're talking about what was given to him, known as the Torah, was the Sufayana. And so we understand that by having restored and the preservation of ancient scriptures. Matter of fact, let me get just to see, we're talking about self-knowledge. Self-knowledge or self-consciousness in an ancient scripture of the Brahmayanas called the Upanishads. This means the knowledge about the existence and the nature. It means the consciousness of our real being. So when you have the teachings of the true teachers, the teachers teach you about the self, your real being, the true being, as we read, with the self being the one in the being. You see one there, the being. I have to go back further. And this is the primary, or this is the premier, or the premium. This is the first. This is the beginning. Let me see. This is the first. This is the beginning. This is the magnificent. The all ark. When we understand, let's get back to the Upanishads. The first and the beginning and the magnificence is denoting to all are. So this is why we have the all are Sufayana Brahmiyana, consisting of all that can never be left out, the all within the all, if you have heard of that phraseology. So what we're going to say is what the Upanishads say. Self-consciousness means self-knowledge. So this is where you see that 54, that Absalom is first a devotion to self-knowledge and self-restraint. Only through self-knowledge and self-restraint can you honor God through your good works and your moral, virtuous life. Self-consciousness means self-knowledge. The knowledge of jhana, prajna, not prana. Our example of prana, which is Brahman, we talking about jhana, prajna. Prana is just with the J silence. We talk about a specific knowledge, not the breathing mechanism of pranayama. Even if we're talking about pranayama, we're talking about the knowledge of self-consciousness. So prana means self-consciousness. So Asalam is first a devotion to prana, self-knowledge, self-consciousness. Jhana, paradise, Asalam. So the Upanishads are the first teachings that clearly explain the concepts of karma and rebirth at a logical, rational level, which have been then characterized the dharmic traditions. This is where you hear dharma. karma, sukha. These words are referring to Dharmic traditions, which are Brahmayana. The Hindus, the Buddhists, the Jain, and the Sikh, aiming at liberation from samsara, in English, hell, or the living concept of ignorance, and the cycle of birth and death. So when you talk about what did the ancient Egyptians practice, they practiced liberating themselves from the cycle of the wheel within the wheel of birth and death. In ancient times, we called it samsara. So the goal for all Sufiyanas, Brahmayanas, is Allah, to be liberated from the pains and the moans of suffering, and as the traditions of what Christ was signaled as. So these traditions of people that we know come from teachings, and they living these teachings out as you supposed to be living these teachings out to attain the inevitable. So I'm just showing you this is what the Sufiyan is in our 7th century time, while we're in the 21st century. So now we have it as a nation, as a community versus a society. We see what a society does, and we see the difference between church and society and community and church. So these things that we have to become clear on. That we seek the well-being for our community, not our church. So we are a community as our word that we will use for what you would call in English church. The earth is already the greatest temple. So that's what I wanted to bring, was God's knowledge. God's knowledge is self-knowledge. So if self can't have the truth, then self should restrain from anything that is not the truth. And so, like all ancient scripture says, that all self-knowledge religion should say is learn to know self. A Sufiyan, a Sufiyana is one who has knowledge of self. The one way, the true way. And he who knows self knows his divine creator. Peace and love. In other words, As-salam